What is going on, guys? It is Jono, and today we're talking about 6 incredibly powerful tips for Airtable, specifically integrating it into make.com and automating the whole process. Just before we do though, make sure to subscribe to this channel if you are new, because I will be releasing videos just like this all the freaking time. Let's dive in. There's 2 things that we want to accomplish in these 6 steps. The first thing is I want to talk about how you can send data into Airtable. So like you can, for example, in make.com, you can create a record, you can update a record, you can delete a record, all of this kind of stuff. And that's great. And then on the flip side, you can also send data into make.com from Airtable. And because that is a bit trickier and most people watching this video may already understand kind of how make.com works, I want to start with the trickier part here because this is going to be more useful to you guys. So we have this database in Airtable set up. This is just a sample database. I threw in a bunch of random things like name, email, tag, message, type, image, all that kind of stuff, right? And essentially what we want to do is we want to allow ourselves to send data automatically from Airtable into make.com, right? And there's a lot of different ways we can do this. So essentially, in a nutshell, what we got to do is we have to hit this automations tab up top here. Now, just before we dive into building this automation, I just want to be transparent here. This does require the team plan to set this up. This is $20 per month per person. So just keep that in mind. And the reason why is because we need to run a script, and that is on the team plan or above. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a new automation here. And there is 2 parts to this automation. There is a trigger, like what is actually going to start this automation? And then there's the action, which is we're actually needing to send this into make.com. And there's a lot of different triggers. We can have it so that when a record is created, right? So when a brand new row is added, we just fire it off, right? We could also have it so that when a record matches a condition, so for example, we could be like, hey, when this checkbox is checked, then we want to send it over to make.com. This is particularly useful because, you know, let's say that, for example, like you want to send data after you've accomplished something, you just click one box and you send it, right? So for example, maybe you're dealing with revisions for a client and you have a link to a portfolio where you send that portfolio when the revisions are done. You just check this, you enter it into make.com. This enters into an email module, sends an email, right? Instead of you having to type out the email in Gmail and send that off and maybe send a follow-up and all that kind of stuff, you could literally just do this in one click of a button. And that's like a simple way of doing things, right? That's like on the most simplest, that's like the most simplistic thing I could think of, but it can get way more complex and save way more time than that. So how we're going to structure this at the beginning is we're going to structure this with a trigger that is when a record matches a condition. And what this condition is we want to make sure, so we're going to add a condition here, is that the check box is checked. We're going to choose a record. This is a sample record so that we can use this to test with. I'm going to go ahead and select that. And then the next thing is we just have to create the action step here. And with this action step, we are running a script. So it's going to open up this. And if you're looking at that being like console.log, what does that mean? Oh my gosh, you are absolutely right. We do unfortunately have to use code here. So I am very sorry. But with that being said, even if you guys don't need to know code, I'm going to walk through everything. I'm going to do my best to explain it because the last thing I want to do is just kind of run through and be like, copy this code in. I want you guys to actually understand this stuff so that you feel empowered by this knowledge. So the next time you run into a situation like this, you're like, at least I understand kind of what's going on, right? So we're going to delete this. And the first thing is that we have input variables. So we can actually define what input variables are going into this code so we can reference it in the code. So you can add an input variable, and we're just going to call this like record ID here. And you can pass in any of these particular things. You could be like, I want to add in the tags here for record ID. I want to add in the image here or whatever. In our case, we just want to pass in that record ID, which is actually going to be, because this is the test sample, it's going to be this row here. So it's the ID of that row or record on file. So in order for us to add this in and find this, we have this boilerplate code here, and it says use input variables in your code using this. So this essentially, this input.config is just like boilerplate code where it contains all of these custom variables that we define down here. So it's going to contain the record ID. If we added another variable in here, it would also contain whatever we add here, which could be like it could be like a name or a message or whatever, but we don't need all that kind of stuff. All we want is the ID, and I will explain why in a bit, why we only want the ID. So essentially, what we're going to do here is we are going to, okay, it looks like I just cut out here. I'm just going to go back in to this, edit the code down here. We are going to do something called declaring a variable. So let me write this down and then tell you what it means. So let record equal this. And then I'm going to do one more thing here, console.log record. Let's run this test, and then I'll explain to you what is going on here. So we have this boilerplate, right? It contains all of these individual pieces of information that we tell it to include. And then what we're doing is we're saying, hey, I want this to be referenced under the key record so that when we log it to the console, this is the console here, which is going to give you messages as to what the hell is actually going on here. We're going to log what the hell record actually is. And what record is it's a key value pair with the key being record ID, which is the name here, and the value being the ID that we put in the input here. So we have a key value pair. This is very similar to like make.com. You have key value pairs here. Here's simpler key value pairs. First name equals Jono. Last name equals Cole. Email equals test@gmail.com. Very similarly, key equals record ID. Value equals this, right? So key value pairs, and we just added that in here, and now we're referencing it in here, and we declared it in a variable called record, right? And similarly, it's like tags where you drill down, and maybe tags in this case is record, and then underneath tags you have something else, which is another key value pair, and that's the record ID equals this. So that's the first thing. Now that we actually have the record ID, we actually need to freaking get this into make.com, right? We need to get that somehow into here. And this is actually just one line of code. It's pretty simple. Well, I don't want to say that actually, but if you're a programmer, it's pretty simple. And we're just going to define another variable called webhook here. And this here doesn't mean anything, like we're not referencing this again, like we're referencing it up top here. We're just going to fire this off, and we're just going to do like let webhook equal, and we're going to do something like an HTTP module, which is like sending data in make.com across the web. So for example, like if I came in here and just to give you a non-coding perspective on this, if I were to run this webhook and I use this HTTP module and I send data to this webhook via post and it gives me this information, I click run here. It just sent that. I just received it here. It contained first name, last name, email, tags. We're doing exactly that, where we're sending information to this particular URL, but instead of doing it in like a no-code environment where there is just fields, we're doing that in a coding environment like this. And how we do that is something called a wait fetch. There's many different ways to do this in coding. And then we have these like brackets down here. Now, essentially what these backticks are here, it's called a template literal in code, which means that you can write text in here, but you can also put custom values in here as well, and it's going to change those custom values into text. So essentially, let me explain what I mean here. We have this webhook URL here, right? And if I just pop this into a new tab, there's two parts to it. There's the ID and there is the root domain here. Okay, this ID means that it's custom exactly to my account in this scenario. Anytime you send data to this URL, this is going to automatically fire this webhook and we're going to receive information, right? Because this custom ID is unique specifically to that scenario. So what we want to do to get information into this scenario is we want to pop that in here, okay? And we need to provide additional information. Like if I was just to run this now, it's going to come up with an empty value here. So I run test and it's going to receive that value, but it's going to be empty, right? And that's not good because we want the ID. So how we pass the ID in here is we do something called URL parameters. And what URL parameters are is you're adding it onto the URL here, but it's not changing the destination of the URL. It's just adding additional context to that URL so that on the other receiving end of the page, it gets information. So, it's like the classic example is like when you go to a website and you're like, how is my name written on the page? Well, in the URL parameter, it says first name equals Bob, and then it says Bob on the page, right? So that's kind of how they get that information. So how this is structured is you have a question mark that denotes the query parameters that we're going to pass in. And just like make.com, it's key value pairs here. So you would have key equals value here, key equals value. And in this case, we just want to put the ID, right, is the key, and the value is this particular record ID. So we're going to have a custom template here. This is where the backticks come in, where the template literals come in. So we can actually populate this string with a custom variable, and it's going to populate the exact ID here in there. And this is dynamic and it'll always change every single time, which is why this whole thing works. And all we have to do is just log record.record ID here. And this is going to pass in this value here, right? Because if you remember, we console logged, which is this record, it gave us this. We just have to drill down on record to record ID, and then we'll get this value. Now, when we run this, oops, I just need to wait for this to run. When we run this, we will receive that ID here, and we have that ID. Bam. Now we've connected Airtable into make.com, and now we can just connect this into thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of applications here. The world is your frickin' oyster. There's just two more things that I want to do here. I want to add one more field here, and I'm going to do an and. So you can add multiple key value pairs here, and it just has to be separated by the and symbol. And I'm going to say Airtable equals true. Okay, so we're going to run this one more time. So I'll come back into make.com, run this, test this again, and we have received the data in make.com. The reason why is because I want in one scenario to receive data here from Airtable and also from these HTTP requests. These are mock like CRM databases. You'll probably use like HubSpot or Go High Level or whatever, send data in here, right? I'm just using HTTP requests instead because, well, I don't want to confuse you guys or with additional, software out there that is irrelevant to this tutorial. I just want to keep it nice and simple and keep it confined to Airtable and make.com. So we have now two variables here. We have ID equals whatever and Airtable equals true. And this is always going to be true because it's hard coded in here as true. So why that's important is because I'm going to now create two paths here. I'm going to create a router here and it's going to go down one of two paths. Is this coming from Airtable or is this coming from the CRM? So it's either coming from one of the two places, and how we know that is because Airtable equals to, actually we're going to say this exists, and in this instance, it does not exist. So we're going to pass in here, Airtable does not exist. So if it's coming from Airtable to have this in here, we'll be able to reference that here, and it'll go down the Airtable exist path. Because we're sending it from an HTTP request and it doesn't contain the value Airtable equals true, then it'll go down this path. It can't go down both. It'll only go down one. And in this case, we're going down the Airtable path. Now that we have the actual ID from Airtable, we want to collect all the rest of the information from Airtable so that we can do whatever it is that we want with it. So now we're going to use Airtable here. We're going to use something called get a record, and this retrieves a single record by its ID. And because we already have the ID here, now we can collect everything else. So I'm going to drill down into the base, and then I'm going to drill down into the table, and then we're going to pass in this ID here. Click OK, we'll run and we'll test this out. We're going to wait for new data here, and we'll run this test. Okay, sweet. So now we've received the data from the webhook and we've received it in Airtable. And now we have everything about this client here. And you might be thinking, well, why don't I just add it down here in these input variables? Like you add in the record ID, you could add in everything else. And the reason I wouldn't add it there is because you're going to have these custom, these URL parameters for everything. And anytime anything changes in this database, you're going to have to go back and manually update it every single time. Whereas this is dynamic. It's like you add another row, it just automatically changes there, right? So this is essentially how you can get data from Airtable directly into make.com. Okay, so now that that's done, let's talk about getting data actually into Airtable. So instead of getting it out of Airtable, now we're going to push it into it. So we have this HTTP module, right? And this is just sending data into this particular webhook here. And the reason why I structured it this way is because I want to simulate a CRM, right? Because chances are you're using an external software, you're sending data in, and I want to set this up in a realistic way so that as you're following along this tutorial, you're like, yeah, I could send data into this webhook from my CRM or wherever, and then essentially just build it exactly what we're building. So it's actually practical, right? So we'll go ahead and fire this off. Just so you know, I put in the webhook URL here. So I copied this URL here. I added it into a particular HTTP module. This is a post request. Post, think about a postman. You're sending things to somewhere. A get is retrieving things. I want to get information from a particular website, but we're sending it. And this is the information that I just essentially added in. This is JSON. It's the foundation of make.com and mostly transferring information online anyways, or at least a popular framework for transferring information. We can click OK, run this, and oops, we need to actually wait for new data here. We'll run it again. And in case this doesn't look pretty to you, well, we've, coming on the other side, this is what exactly the same information, but instead it's just a bit more pretty and it's more readable, right? So now that we have this, we can go down the next step here, right? Which is we want to take that information and we want to, let's say, we want to create a record here. So we'll go into Airtable and we're going to create a record. We're just going to drill down into the particular database that we've set up here, into the particular table. And then in make.com, similarly to what we did, we can just map in the right fields here. So we'll put in first name, last name, we'll put in email, we'll add these tags in here as well. So the cool thing, actually, I'm going to cover this in a bit. We'll circle back to this. I'll put in a message, and that's pretty much it. We're good to go. We'll click OK. We'll run this, wait for new data, and we're also going to run this workflow and receive data in. And now we've added it into into Airtable. I'm always confusing the two words, so if I don't reference them properly, I'm sorry. But it looks like we just received that record in here. So jono.test@gmail.com, and here is the particular message. So that's awesome, right? And I'm sure you probably, if you've ever used make.com before, you know how to do that. But the cool thing is not necessarily that. The cool thing is let's say you want to go ahead and you want to send data from your CRM into make.com, transfer that into Airtable. I almost made the same mistake again and called it the wrong thing. But here's where it comes into practicality. Like, you send information from your CRM into Airtable. You don't want to duplicate the client. You want to make sure that you only update a client if they exist, and you create a client if they don't exist, right? But you don't want to always be creating a client every single time, because that's going to be chaotic and it's just going to be the worst thing that you can do, right? So what we want to do is structure this in a way so that we check if that client exists or not. And if they exist, well, then we're going to update them. But if they don't exist, well, then we're going to create them. And there's a couple ways we can do that, but there is I'll show you both ways, but there's a preferred way that I have here. So coming into Airtable, we're going to search records here. And with the search records, we're going to drill down into it, and we'll select table 1 here. And once again, we want to return all output fields. And we have this formula section here. And with this formula section, what it allows us to do is search for somebody based on one of these fields. So for me personally, like, I want to make sure that I'm searching for somebody based on a unique identifier. A name is not a good unique identifier because two people can have the same name, but an email there's only one of them in the world. Another one is an ID. So if you have an ID from your CRM that you can pass in here and then reference later on, that's a perfect unique identifier. Phone number is okay, but the formatting can be off, so I don't recommend it. I would do email or the ID from the CRM, and the ID is the best option. For this example, we're going to use that email. So in the formula field, we have to come in and add in the exact formula that Airtable has here. Now you can come in and you can take a look at all of their formulas down here on their site, and it's going to give you detailed documentation on how to do this. And I think there is like a playground here where you can actually see all of their different formulas here, and it gives examples and all that kind of stuff. And I can link down at the bottom here to just see how you could filter. But for most people watching this, you're just going to try and find the value based on the email, right? So I'm going to type in email here. And the reason why it's email with a capital E is because this particular field here is email with a capital E. And then this is equal to, right? And then we have to put in quotations here, the particular email. And the email we're getting is from the webhook. So we're going to pass this email into those quotations. This is a dynamic field, so it's always going to change no matter, or depending on the customer. We're going to click OK. I'll save this and run it. And let's see if, actually, I'm going to stop this. I'm going to delete this, this create a workflow here, or create a contact. We'll run this and we'll see if this works. Sweet. So it did work. And we were able to find that particular customer, Jono Cole. Here's everything that we have about them. So what we can go ahead and do here is we could have a flow control, right, where it goes down two paths. And similar to here, it's like if that person exists, then we update them. If that person doesn't exist, well, then we don't update them, right? Very similar to how we did it here, where it's like they exist, update, don't exist, don't. But there's an even easier way to do this, and I'm going to show you how right now. So we'll add a module, go back into Airtable, and there's this upsert a record option here. And what upsert a record does is it combines the two into one. So if they exist, we're going to update them. If they don't exist, well, then we're going to create them. So we'll drill down into the right base here. We'll drill down into the right table. And then we'll find them based on a record ID. Now in this particular field here, this is searching if they exist or if they don't exist. So what I like to do is I have an if empty formula here. And you can actually see here, and I'll zoom in, what happens here is it checks the value. Oops, okay, that disappeared. It checks the value. And if A exists, it returns A. But if it doesn't exist, then it returns a fallback value, which is B. So what we want to do here is I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to add in an empty string as a fallback value. And I'm going to add in the ID that we received in the search step as the primary value. So if that ID exists, well, then we're updating it. If it doesn't exist, it will return an empty field, which means, hey, Airtable, can you please go ahead and create a new record? We'll just go ahead and add all of the values in here one more time. Email, message, and we'll call it a day with that. Click OK, we'll run, wait for new data, send this off, and there we go, right? In this case, because we found a client, it has just updated that person. It didn't create somebody new. Now, the next tip that I want to share here is that with Airtable, unlike Google Sheets, you can add in more than just text values here. So there's more than just, cells and you add in text. You can add in, for example, arrays or lists. You can add in files here as well. So for example, you could add in an image, you could add in a video, you could add in a resume, whatever it is you want. And then you could also add in here tags, right? So you could add in multiple different tags in a list format. So we can go ahead and do that. And in this upsert record module here, what we're going to do is we're going to add in an image, and the file URL we're receiving from the webhook here. So I've gone ahead and just added an image in there from Unsplash. And then we can add in a name. I'm just going to title this image with the ID of the person, just so that this is a unique name for every single row. And then lastly, I want to make sure that we add in here the tags. And in tags, all we have to do is map and pass in this particular array here or list. And this list contains multiple values. The list is a text list of tags. So we're going to add in the tag lead, SEO, and service here. We'll go ahead and run, and we'll send that data in to Airtable. Looking back, we've now added in the tags here, and we've also added in that picture here. Once again, I just got this off Splash in like 2 seconds. So the fourth tip that I have for you guys is using artificial intelligence to automatically pre-populate a lot of these fields. So let's say that we have this particular client coming into Airtable for the first time, or maybe the second time or whatever. And let's say that, we see the message and we want to classify this as either a lead or we want to classify this as a customer service inquiry. This is just a really simple example, obviously, but there's a million and one ways you could do this. You could literally auto-populate almost everything based on the information you have, granted you had enough information. And that's what I want to talk about in this next step here. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to add them in here. And in the particular database, we're going to set up another automation here. And this automation is going to be different from the first one, where in this one, the trigger is going to be when a record is created, right? So we'll go ahead and change this to when a record is created. I'm actually just going to go ahead and copy this code too, just so that we don't have to do this again. And this time, we're going to select the table. Everything looks good here. We'll choose a record, which is going to be this record that we just added in. And we will run a script. We're going to paste this in here. And the only difference here is that I want to make sure that we don't add this Airtable equals true tag, because that's going to run down the wrong path. All we need to do now is add in this record ID field to add into the input config file so that we have the ID of the row ready to go that we can reference. And we're pretty much set. Let's run this, wait for new data, and test this field out. Actually, just before we run this, we're actually going to send this down a third path here. So I'm going to add another URL parameter here, and I'm going to say AI response equals true. And coming into our scenario here, we'll have another path where the filter is set up for AI response here. And you can see that, that this can get quite complicated. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to first unlink this just so that we can run the scenario and wait for the data so that we can map it properly. So I'm going to run test here. It's been sent. We'll link this back in, and we'll also make sure that the AI response does not exist here. We'll make sure that the AI response field does not exist here. But in this third row, we'll make sure that the AI response does exist, right? And now we're going to go down this path. And in this path, what we're going to do is very similarly, we're going to actually clone this. We will just find that value, first of all, right? And once we go ahead and find that value based on the ID here, we're going to use AI or ChatGPT to create a response for us. So we'll choose create a completion here. The max tokens, we're going to put in 500. This is the length of the response that it'll get back. And typically speaking, 500 is going to be more than enough for what we're looking for it to do. And then you're charged based on the length of the response here, but this is good. The model, we're going to have 3 models in here, or sorry, we're going to have one model, which is 4.0 mini, and 3 messages in here. We're going to have a user message. We're going to have a assistant message. We're also going to have a system message. Let's break this down. The user message is what the user input is. So essentially it's like, hey, I want you to do X, Y, and Z. The assistant message is, hey, this is what the output should look like. Like, give me a response like this. And then the system message is just saying, hey, this is additional context for you to provide the right output. So the user message will be, please classify, and I want to come back in here and I want to classify this as a lead or customer service inquiry based on the message that we have here, right? So we're going to please classify this as a lead or a customer service inquiry, and we'll pass in that text here. So it'll be message, and the output would be something like customer service. And for the system, this could be lead as well, but ultimately that output is going to be determined based on what these values are. So it has to be defined in Airtable as well. And then the system is going to be just saying, please, and I'm Canadian, so I have to say please in every single message, except for the output here because I can't change. I don't want to do that. It's going to screw up the results. But please do not include intros or outros, just the classification. And this is important because it might be like, sure, the response is customer service, but we can't add in here, sure, this response is customer service, because that's not an option. We have lead and customer service. We can't have anything else. We can't have the AI providing any additional information. And then we can simply just go ahead and update that. I'll just clone this in here. It's always going to update it because there will be an ID here. All we have to do is select the correct ID and then add in the correct information. So we'll add in name, we'll add in email here, we'll add in tags down here, tags, and then we'll add in the message. We'll add in also the result here for type. So this is going to classify it as customer service, or it's going to classify it as lead or whatnot. And we'll have the ID here. Once again, the image URL will go here. And that's pretty much it. So we can run this, wait for new results, and then we'll just go ahead and test this again. And let's see how this works. Okay, sweet. So it came down the third path. It filtered out of the first two. We got the record. We got the response, which it was classified as a lead, and then we updated this, and now the type is lead. So obviously this is like a simplistic way of doing things. You don't just have to change the type, but you could go down the funnel, down the pipeline, keep using AI to automatically update all of the fields that probably could be updated by artificial intelligence, right? So this is going to save you a ton of time and not having to do things that you probably know could be done automatically or done by using artificial intelligence. I just have two last things that I want to talk about here, and then we're going to wrap up for this video. And that is dealing with hundreds or thousands of different records. And you might be thinking, well, that's not going to happen, or you know, that's very unlikely. It is probably pretty unlikely, but I can tell you from my personal experience, like a lot of the times I'll be just going about it one record at a time, and then we'll have like some architecture change, right? And then we have to overhaul everything and add in 1,000 different results at the same time. And if you do this the wrong way, it's gonna cost a lot of time and a lot of headache and a lot of stress. And what I want to do is just kind of share with you guys how I go about dealing with large sums of data so that you can avoid all of those costly mistakes that I made at my own expense. So I hope this can, also help you out. Okay, sweet. So I'm going to go back into this HTTP module here. And we're going to fire off data from this source. The only difference between the two here is that in this source, we have two clients. And this is just an example, a mock example of a CRM. And we're using two different clients here, right? But pretend like, this could scale to 1,000 or whatever. So we're going to run this, and it's going to go down this middle path here, right? And what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're dealing with, we're able to make sure this is scalable so that whether it's one or many clients, we can handle them all. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to unlink this, and I'm just going to run the results here and wait for new data and run this. And we've now received the data. So the thing is this is just mock data. I did structure it slightly differently. And the reason I structured it slightly differently is because this is contained within an array or a list of clients, and this wasn't contained within that list of clients. So it's just one client. But if you're dealing with data from the same source, it's always going to be structured the same. It's just that I went ahead in my sample data and I didn't think about that until right now. But we're going to have to switch this up slightly. So just to make sure this works. And how we're going to do this is we're going to add in another module in front here. And this is going to be a flow control and specifically an iterator. Now, what's going on here is that we want to make sure that we can handle 2, 5, 10, 1,000, 10,000, a billion clients at the same time. But as you know, if you just threw in data of like 3 clients or 10 clients at the same time, well, you can't just fit like 10 clients in one row, right? You need to go through each client one by one and add them in together. So client 1 will go on row 1, client 2 will go on row 2, client 3 will go on row 3, and so on and so forth. And how we do that is through something called an iterator. What an iterator does is it takes something, well, a list, and a list is called array in coding, but it takes a list and it breaks it down from 2 results into 1 at a time. So it's going to go through the first result. And then after the first result, we've searched for the record and then updated the record. Then it's going to go through the second result. And then it's going to search for the record and then update the record. And they're both going to be in 2 separate rows here. So how we're going to do this is we're going to pass into this iterator here, the client object or the client, list. And then all we have to do is just remap these values here because we were originally mapping it to the webhook, but now we got to go back and change it to the iterator. And the reason why we're changing it to the iterator here is because the iterator is a dynamic value, which means that for value 1, it's going to be the email of the first client, which would be in this instance, test@gmail.com. And then for value 2, the email is going to be another test@gmail.com, right? So we need to find that person based on their unique email. And this iterator will be a dynamic value that always changes every single time it runs. Same thing with this upsert record here. We just need to go ahead and change these things as well. And then we're pretty much good to go. We'll add in the first and last name here and then the email and just map out all the rest of these values here. Okay, almost done. Sweet. And now what we can do is we can click OK or run once, wait for new data, come back here and run. And now you can see here that it ran through the iterator and you can see there's 1 result here, right? It only ran through this iterator once, but everything else has 2 results because we had 2 clients here. So we ran through the first client and then we ran through the second client. And because we had this upsert value here, we're able to edit the first client and then add the second client because they didn't already exist in the database. Now, one last thing that I want to mention here is that you could see how fast these updated. They updated in like less than a second. But the thing is Airtable has something called rate limiting. And this is the 6th tip that I'm going to go over. And you can do 5 requests per second. Now we did 4 there, so it was fine. But if we did 6 requests there, we ran 1 more client, it would have given us an error and it would have said, hey, you can't do this, right? You're cut off. So that's obviously a problem, right? Because you want to make sure that you don't get cut off, especially because if you're updating 1,000 results and then you get cut off at 200 results in, and you're like, crap, like I just wasted all this time. Do I restart? Do I try and figure it out from where I left off? It's just a complicated mess and it sucks. And if you've been there, you know, and I've seen a lot of people go through this and it's just always such a struggle and a pain in the ass, to be honest with you guys. So in order to solve that, we add in 1 module here, which is called sleep. Now what sleep does is it just delays the execution of this module for a predetermined amount of time. In this case, it's 2 seconds. We'll go ahead and run this, wait for data, and I'll show it to you because I think it's better if you just see it visually. So it's going to wait 2 seconds and then run the first client, and then wait 2 seconds, and then it's going to run the second client, right? And that is how you can overcome rate limiting in Airtable. So that's all the 6 tips. What I just want to briefly go over now is essentially the difference between Google Sheets and Airtable, because if you guys have watched any of my past videos, you'll know that I primarily use Google Sheets and not Airtable. This is actually the first video I've made on Airtable. So I kind of want to go through the differences here really quickly before we wrap up. So first of all, using Airtable, generally speaking, I'd probably recommend it, right? I think overall, it's probably more dynamic, flexible, and it can cater to a larger amount of needs than Google Sheets. So some of the reasons why is because it has linked databases here. So let's say you don't just have one database, but you have multiple databases, and maybe you have the same client email across multiple databases. You can update those in real time, which is nice. So, you don't have to manually do that kind of stuff. And you can also get like collaborative reporting, or you can have team members in one database view information on the other database without having to go back and forth, which is super cool. And then you can have multiple views too. So in Google Sheets, you have very much, it's one-dimensional. You have cells, that's it. With Airtable, you can have different views. So you can have a Kanban board here. You can have a grid view, of course. You can have a calendar view, seeing when things are due, and all these other views as well. So that's quite nice. The downside is that you actually have to pay a decent amount for this. So it's $24 if you build per month. And this is per person as well. So if you have a team of 10, it can add up quite quick, right? So that's the major downside to Airtable. And that's also the main reason I use Google Sheets, just because it's accessible to anyone, no matter where they're at in their journey through entrepreneurship. And then the other cool thing about Airtable is that they have multiple input fields. So of course, in Google Sheets, you have, cells. Here you can add in pictures, not just links. You can also add in arrays or lists like these tags. So that's pretty cool. And then you have access to automation, right? So you can have this tab and do a whole bunch of different stuff with this. Ultimately speaking, you do kind of have this in Google Sheets as well. You have scripts, you can write your own code, and you can also integrate into make.com. So it's not like it's a benefit, but you can still accomplish the same thing in both. And then the last thing here is formulas. So while Airtable does have formulas in here that you can leverage, it's just a bit clunky. I don't really like the way it is, because you have to have a predetermined formula field, and you have to write it there, and that's it. Whereas Google Sheets, they have, I think, better formulas, and it's just easier to calculate things. So if you're super intense on math or formulas or calculations, then Google Sheets may be the better option for you. But ultimately speaking, those are the biggest differences that I've noticed between using the two options. So that's it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it to the end, please let me know what your thoughts were in the comments down below. Or if you guys have questions, I'd love to hear them. And obviously, I'd love to help out if you do have any questions. So if you're new to this channel, or if this is your 50th or 10,000th time watching this, feel free, or please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. It helps me out, but it also allows me to help you out by providing you videos just like this. Assuming you like this one, you probably like the other ones as well. Have an amazing day, guys, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.